Welcome again to the Vintage Time Australia channel, and in today's video we're going to revisit the SEIKO 56 series movement, and specifically the little metal Quickset star that I make for these, and troubleshooting it when it misbehaves. So it helps if you understand a little bit more about the project and what really we set out to achieve with it. So the main goal of it was to produce a product that was cheap enough that you could use it to repair Lordmatic movements as well. Now, the catch with a lot of the Lordmatic watches is that a lot of them are not worth more than about 150 to 200 US. Some of them even less than that. So the goal of the part, which you'll see installed just there, was to make it cheap enough that it would be cost effective for repairs on Lordmatics. So when you're looking at a watch that's maybe worth 150 to 200, say the part was $100, it really wouldn't make it cost effective. So if we look at the original part, I'll just put this aside for a sec. If we look at the original part, you'll see, and sorry, my hands are filthy at the moment because I was working on the car, but you'll see there the original star section has little wings on it, which make it a little bit thicker. And I might just actually bring in my poor man's ultra macro here just so that we can get a better look at it. So there we go. So you can see there little wings, and this one's split. You can see the fault right there. But you can see the little wings on there, which help make the part a little bit thicker without being thicker in the middle. Now if you flick around to my metal part, you'll see it doesn't have the wings. So ultimately the design is a compromise. Now the reason I went that way with it is because the additional cost to machine in the wings would have taken the price up to at least double, and that would really make the whole thing non-viable for a lot of those 56 series movements. So I didn't really want to go that way. However, looking at the movement in detail, I worked out that you don't really need those wings for it to work. However, the movement's got to be clean, and also you've got to take into account that some of these have been open half a dozen times or more, and there could be some things that are a bit wonky in there. As well as that, you've got wear and tear, which can play a part in there, and also people that have messed around with them before and maybe made a bit of a mess of things. In any case, the first problem that we're going to look at, which is the most common one with these, is bent teeth on the day wheel. Sorry, the date wheel, not the day. So I've introduced a fault here. However, most of the ones that I've had issues with, this has been the main fault on them. So the way it presents is that you can turn the Quickset, and you can see there it doesn't engage the tooth on the date wheel. So if we go back to poor man's ultra macro again, you can see there it's just totally going over the top of the tooth. Obviously that's undesirable behavior. So anyway, that is the most common fault, and the way to fix that is, well, the way I do it anyway, is I get a screwdriver and I just manually move the wheel around so that it has a flat surface under it, and then I get a screwdriver under the tooth, and this is a bit of a bodge, but it does work. and you have to be very careful. So the date wheels are actually made out of aluminium, so they're reasonably soft. Now we just get that under there. Now they can be, if they're severely bent, they can be quite tight, and you may need to just start over here first. So I'm going to get the tip of the screwdriver under it, and I'm just going to twist the screwdriver like that, just to very gently bend it up, just slightly. And it can be a little bit fiddly, but at worst you might damage the date wheel. So now I've got a little bit more leverage under it. Just bend it up just a little bit, and that should solve the problem. So now bearing in mind this sort of huskum of a movement is really dirty. It's just come straight out of the junk box. Now I have had these before that have had about 6 or 7 bent teeth on them. Usually if it does happen, it's only 1 or 2, but I did have one as well that was bent all on one side, and I just replaced the date wheel because it was not really any good. But you can see there now, I might just adjust this lighting a little bit. Now you wouldn't normally do the calendar this quick, but that solved that problem. Now the next problem that I sometimes get with these, I haven't seen it myself, but I've had other people that have had the issue, is on the day wheel you've got 2 components that move the day wheel. So you've got this intermediate wheel there. Now that should move relatively freely, but it shouldn't have much end shake in it. So you can see there, it doesn't require too much effort to move that. And end shake wise, it's got really none. Now that's because I've adjusted this, so I can't really pull it up and down at all. But sometimes what's happened, and I'll show you why this happens. Now let me just take this off. So yeah, screw's just gone off to the side there. But anyway, if you take this off, basically you've got that post there, and what can happen is someone's pulled it apart before and they've pushed the post all the way in, so it affects the end shake. And the problem with that is that then that intermediate wheel sits too tight on these 3 little nubs here, and it requires a lot of effort to turn. And the problem with that as well, in addition to the Quickset not really liking it, is that you're going to get the issue that when the calendar comes around to change, it's going to have so much torque on it that it's going to jam up. So we don't really want that to happen. Yeah, this has got all sorts of issues, this movement, but yeah, so that's really what we're looking to not have happen. So you may need to just take this module off here, this little plate, and just adjust the end shake on it if you're getting too much slop in there. Now the way that presents is that you can have the day wheel on, and it will take a couple of turns to try and press it over or click it over, and that can be one of 2 things. So we're just going to address this one first. So see that there, the thread for that is just a thread insert, so you can adjust the end shake on that if it's too loose. Now there is a bodge way of doing it as well, and you do risk pushing it through, but if you don't want the effort of pulling out a jeweling tool or a stake or something and just want to do it quickly, you can do it this way as well. Another thing as well is just on oiling, I would let me just get this back on. I'm sort of doing this from a distance, so it's a bit tricky. Now I'm just going to get this guy back in, and we'll just cover oiling on this. Now, for the most part, you probably don't really want to oil much the calendar system at all, really, because any oil that you put on there introduces drag, and drag is a real problem with the calendar because it just sucks power out of the movement. So ideally you want it as free flowing as possible, and oil can become a big problem. Now, that was just a little bit fiddly. These movements really are not very forgiving for assembly issues or putting screws in the wrong places or anything like that. So you have to be ultra careful that you get the right screws in the right places. So if you don't, you're going to get problems with bits hitting each other and all sorts of stuff. Particularly with this here, those two screws there have got a different finish on them, I think. Oops. So if we just look closely at them, yeah, they can either be polished or sometimes they've got this sort of line pattern over the top, but there's only one place where those two screws are used, and if you get them mixed up, you get all sorts of issues. So just keep that together. Now, on oiling points, you can put a drop of 90-10 on these three nubs here, but I wouldn't oil it anywhere else because you're just going to introduce drag. So we'll just put this intermediate wheel back on, and I'll just show you the bodge fix if it's really sloppy. Now the problem is, if it's sloppy and you've got end shake on it, or a fair bit of end shake, is that the little star is just going to underrun the gear. Now, the bodge fix that you can do is that you get the back of the tweezers and you put it across the screw, and you can just sort of press it down just lightly. Sort of put the flat over it so that it can't go any further than what you're pushing, and you can just push it gently and then make sure it still turns reasonably freely, and you've sort of solved your end shake issue there. So if it flops right up and down, what's going to happen, this is going to come in, you're going to turn that, and the torque is just going to force the star under the gear. So even with the plastic part, what can happen even with that is if that is tight, you can press the plastic part up against it and your wings are just going to snap right off. So it really is just a weakness of this design altogether that we're trying to address here, and I think the metal gear does the job. The plastic gears, because of the torque involved with this, there's actually quite a lot of torque on the date wheel, not so much on the day wheel, but because of the torque involved, I really think the plastic's not a suitable material for this job. So you can see there, we've got nearly no end shake. It's got the tiniest amount of end shake on it, and that's it, and no problems at all there. The other issue that can happen is the day click, which is just here. That can be too tight or too loose, so you'll just have to adjust that, and you just bend it here to adjust that, either back or forth, just to loosen it or tighten it. That can be an issue as well. If it's too tight or too loose, you can get issues with that. So we're just going to put this back on now and get it running. Just make sure I've got things around the right way. There we go. So there we go. Off she goes again. Now that works pretty good. Now if you do have a bend in it or something like that, you can't. This is just a crappy wheel I've pulled out of the junk box. It can get a little bit slippy, and that can also be adjusted by adjusting the click there. So by either tightening it or loosening it, that can improve that. and also make sure that you've got the correct amount of end shake on that intermediate wheel. And also the movement really has to be clean. Like this has got gum all over it and stuff like that, so actually the bottom of the day wheel is catching on some gum or something that's on the movement. So when they're clean they don't really do this, but it does work, and that gets the machine gets the watch out of the junk box basically. So that's just some of the troubleshooting things that I've come into. Now another thing with these as well is that bent stems will be a problem. So if the stem's bent, then you could have an issue. This has a bent stem, so the thing with the bent stem, and we're just going to partially disassemble the keyless works on this as well, is that it puts an oval motion on the whole keyless works, which causes an issue as well. So it's not too obvious there, but it certainly is an issue. Now I'm just going to take the calendar plates off. Now if you've got any of this keyless works assembled incorrectly, you're going to have a whole bunch of issues. As I mentioned before, these are incredibly unforgiving for assembly mistakes. Okay, so that's those plates off. Now to get to everything, we've really got to take off this intermediate wheel as well. Now if you do my bodge fix on that and it's too tight, you have to take that plate out and reset the threaded insert there. There's no other way of doing it. Okay, so just pay note to how this is assembled, because it's not necessarily intuitive with these, which is why I think they're a terrible watch to start working on if you're just starting out. So you can actually see how complex the whole keyless works there is. It's just, there's bits everywhere. So any of that assembled incorrectly and you're going to have an issue. So we're just going to take this little plate off here. And I'm going to show you where some other issues with these potentially are. Alright, so now I've actually got to the setting lever, which is just there. Now I think this setting lever as well is an early development one, so it's got a, yeah, it is definitely, it's got a different tooth profile to the production one, so that will affect how it performs as well. So this is just like an ancient one from years ago that I had in the junk box, but the new ones are better. So we'll take that off, and you can see actually how complex really that is. Now the way this keys in, you'll see it slips under, well, it just goes on there, and it keys into this gear here. So you sort of push it in and it meshes in with that. Now other issues that these can have, and this is the one that we were having before, is that these gears can have some wear on them, or they can be partially stripped and then you've got a problem. Also, if there's any wear or shake or anything around here, you have an issue. So all these things you should check, especially if you're having issues with these. And you can see there, so you see that keys into there as well. This is sprung. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take off the setting lever spring, and this is the other key point with these. If you don't get this right, it will not work. you have a really bad day with these movements. So I'm just going to take this off, and yes, I've got a screwdriver in my mouth. Now this spring here, see how that touches the edge of that setting lever? If you don't put the right spring in there, and that doesn't put tension on that, it's not actually going to impart enough force onto the little star gear lever here to operate the calendar properly. So you've got to make sure, see you've got the little hockey stick leg on there, that's got to be keyed into the corner of that lever, and the short end is up there. If you don't get that right, all sorts of stuff won't work properly. These can also be worn there, and as I mentioned before, these gears can have some chewed out bits on them, which will be a problem. That can be worn on the inside as well and be really wobbly. So there's just a whole bunch of things that can go wrong. Alright, so I might finish that video up there. I think that addresses most of the issues that people have had with these. However, if you've got one of these and you still can't get it working, email me, because we'll find a solution. That's what I'm all about. And yeah, you might find a problem that I haven't run into before, and we can actually solve it. So we'll leave that there. Thanks for watching, and I'll reiterate again, if you are having any issues with these, it's probably going to be one of these issues. If it's not, email me and we'll figure it out. Alright, thanks for watching, and tune in again soon.